The left's habitual tendency to justify and defend the excesses of their own movement has appalling consequences. But the harm caused by this trait was never more apparent than with the Soviets. And those apologists began almost immediately. In 1919, the American journalist Lincoln Steffens coined the memorable phrase, "I have seen the future, and it works." In fact, when he wrote those words, he'd never even been to the Soviet Union. And when he finally got there, he confided to a friend that, "I'm a patriot for Russia. The future is there. That is my belief. But I don't want to live there." Some were even more brazen and foolish. When Ethel Snowden arrived in Moscow as a member of the British Trades Union Congress and Labour Party delegation, she was informed that the average Russian factory worker only earned enough in a month to feed his family for 3 days. She naively replied, "Oh, how clever and frugal of the workers to live without any food for the other 27 days of the month. How do they do it?" The defenders of Stalin tended to come from the highest echelons of society. E.H. Carr, the Cambridge Don, worked on his 14-volume Apologia for the Soviet Union from 1946 until his death in 1982, while C.P. Snow, active in the Labour Party, remained a committed Stalinist his entire life. J.D. Bernal, the British physicist, even suggested that critics of the Soviet Union should be silenced. Stalin's defenders really came to the fore during his famine, though. He had murdered all the most productive farmers, corralled the remainder into giant collective farms, and the state seized the grain from the peasants, sold it to buy arms and ammunition, and starved millions of Ukrainians to death. This was all widely reported, but such accounts were predictably dismissed by the left as lies of the right-wing press. H.G. Wells met Stalin in 1934 and commented that he had never met a man more candid, fair and honest. His characteristics explained his remarkable ascendancy over the country, since no one is afraid of him and everyone trusts him. George Bernard Shaw visited while famine was raging, but he reported that the Russians were uncommonly well fed. He added that, "I did not see a single undernourished person in Russia," and remarkably concluded that, in the USSR, unlike Britain, there was freedom of religion. Sir John Maynard Keynes justified the regime's brutality as they were fighting a war against an enemy class. Keynes, Shaw and Wells had joined with Sidney and Beatrice Webb to found the New Statesman, a Labour weekly, and the Webbs were even more notorious Stalinists. They were leaders of the Fabian Society and founders of the London School of Economics, and the Webbs were also key figures in the Labour Party, with Sidney securing a cabinet position under Ramsay MacDonald. In 1935, they published their magnum opus, Soviet Communism, A New Civilization? It simply regurgitated Soviet propaganda as fact, and is probably the most worthless piece of academia ever produced. Yet in 1937, for their second edition, they triumphantly removed the question mark from the title. Malcolm Muggeridge attempted to warn them of the truth, but the Webbs simply dismissed him as a foolish and misguided youth. Edouard Herriot, the French socialist leader, had been given a carefully guided tour of the Ukraine, and he confidently dismissed stories of the famine as lies of the bourgeois press. Vasily Grossman was contemptuous of the Frenchman's visit. On the neighbouring farm, children were desperately scrambling in the dirt for earthworms to devour. But the worst culprit was undeniably the New York Times Moscow correspondent, Walter Duranty. Durante, a committed communist, knew the full truth about the famine and Stalin's regime, but to keep socialism's image pristine, he deliberately lied about events, distortions that were cheered by the leftists of the day as incontrovertible proof. Durante and the New York Times were even given Pulitzer Prizes for dispassionate, interpretive reporting of the news from Russia. The Pulitzer Committee extolled Durante's scholarship, profundity, impartiality, sound judgment, and exceptional clarity. At a pro-USSR banquet at the Waldorf Astoria, crammed with New York's smug and affluent left, Durante received a thunderous standing ovation. It all sounds quite familiar. Yet his despicable lies had helped power a genocide that killed around 14 million people. Durante's supporters also bitterly attacked Malcolm Muggeridge, who had actually revealed the truth, a process that would be repeated with Robert Conquest decades later. It was the same with the show trials and Stalin's Red Terror. These appallingly fake trials helped power Stalin's murder of approximately 2 million people. But the left gave widespread support yet again. The playwright Bertolt Brecht claimed, "The more innocent they are, the more they deserve to die." The New Statesman concluded that there had undoubtedly been much plotting in the USSR. The Webbs claimed that Soviet courts were more seriously judicial, more balanced in their discussion than any court trial I have attended in America. While the eminent pro-communist British lawyer Pritt, even as late as 1966, long after the truth was undeniable, still held a socialist belief that a socialist state would not try people unless there was a strong case against them. Walter Durante inevitably stuck his oar in too, and claimed that no one who heard them could doubt for a moment that what they said was true. The same apologists defended Stalin's horrific gulag as well. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that evidence of the Soviet camp system should be ignored, even if it were true, as such admissions would dent the aspirations of the French proletariat. George Bernard Shaw outright defended the purges, suggesting that we cannot afford to give ourselves moral airs when our most enterprising neighbour, the USSR, humanely and judiciously liquidates a handful of exploiters and speculators to make the world safe for honest men. Viktor Kravchenko, who had revealed details of camp life, was viciously smeared by the French left, in another foretaste of the treatment accorded to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Pierre Day, the leading French communist, wrote poetic defences of the liberating effect of the Gulag, while Pat Sloan, the British communist, described Soviet imprisonment as an enjoyable experience. The British Communist Party overtly defended Stalin's later anti-Semitic purges in what was dubbed the Doctor's Plot, and so did Paul Robeson. The renowned singer asked to see Itzhak Pfeffer when he visited Moscow. Pfeffer had been detained for 3 years in the anti-Semitic purges that followed the murder of Solomon Mikkels in 1948. The KGB took time to fatten him up, but Pfeffer looked haunted when meeting Robeson. He knew the interview was being recorded, so he pleaded with the American singer with his eyes, and he ran his finger across his neck. Yet Robeson, like Durante before him, simply lied when he got back to the US, all to protect socialism's image. He claimed that Pfeffer was fine, and there was no threat to the Jews at all. As a result, Pfeffer was killed in the Gulag shortly afterwards, along with thousands of other Jews, and the truth only emerged years later when the guilt-racked Robeson faced death himself. Through Lenin and Stalin's regimes, through the famines, the gulag, the terror, the Soviets had murdered approximately 35 million people. And they had destroyed the lives of everyone who had survived. Yet the left-wing defences lasted right to the end of Stalin's regime. Ewan MacColl, the communist folk singer who was father of Kirsty MacColl, and who wrote Dirty Old Town and First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, also composed a ballad of Stalin. The lyrics are revealing. Joe Stalin was a mighty man, and he made a mighty plan. He harnessed nature to the plough to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the forgeman he has been, and he's made the workers' state the best the world has ever seen. When Stalin died, communists around the world sobbed, and the Daily Worker printed this saccharine cartoon. Labour Monthly wrote that the Georgian steered the ship of human hopes and aspirations with unflinching tenacity, courage, judgment and confidence. Now the road lies plain ahead. Yet the communist movement would be severely shaken by what happened just 3 years later. And we'll discuss that in detail in the next episode. If you'd like to support this channel, please like and subscribe. And if you're interested in these topics, I've written 2 books which go into them in extensive detail. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they're available on the links below. Please feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.